So, a little bit about Bipin. Bipin is a globally certified trainer in security and cloud security. He has provided trainings for multiple organizations and for clients globally with 10 plus years of training experience. He is involved in company internal training, including analyzing, creating, and developing content. He has been an IT security consultant at Infosys and has been responsible for finding gaps in current services provided to various clients, designing strategies for VAPT, governance, risk management, service delivery, etc. He has been the Chief Information Security Specialist for designing strategies for VAPT, governance, risk management services, service deliveries. He was involved in creating and managing infrastructure, network, and cloud security and providing robust solutions to clients. At present, he is a cybersecurity service delivery manager slash architect at Gemraj Technologies, United Kingdom, handling various teams in the SOC and streamlining their processes, developing and optimizing vulnerability management programs, identifying risks, conducting impact analysis, identifying security controls, and implementation. Bipin has created VA plans for cloud and hybrid infrastructure. He has developed strategies for application whitelisting, blacklisting for new apps introduced in the environment, created playbooks for SOC. He has been creating and managing risk registers and risk management plans for enterprise level IT security risks. At the Knowledge Academy, he provides training for advanced courses such as CISSP, ISO 27001, CCSK, CCSP, AWS Solutions Architect, SOC, etc. He has a diploma in cloud infrastructure management, in IT security and ethical hacking, and in networking and communication. He is also AWS certified solutions architect. So, with that, over to you, Bipin. We are all looking forward to your very interesting talk. Over to you.
Thank you, Aditya, for that introduction. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone present here. It's great to be back. And last year I was a speaker at this event as well, and I thank Rocheston on inviting me again. I probably spoke pretty well last time to be invited back. Thanks for the introduction and the opportunity, Rocheston. Haja, Aditya, kudos to you on running this event successfully year on year again. Right now, today as you can see on the screen, I don't have a PPT prepared. I'm not going to be looking at specific points. We are going to discuss what uh, what we want to look for, what our approach should be when we talk about digital forensics and we talk about cloud computing, right? Now on the screen, don't worry, I'm not going to bore you much with definitions and deployment models and all that. We're just going to have a small review of that because the forensic requirement is going to change as per which cloud you're going to talk about, as per which service you're going to consume, right? Now, from a digital forensic perspective, uh, we club that with security in an aspect of where it allows us to investigate certain resources, certain avenues which help us identify something that has already happened. Now, even if before we go into cloud and we want to discuss how do we manage forensics on a cloud, we first need to understand why we need forensics and at what times will forensics be involved, right? Uh, Now, this all goes back to your security frameworks that you're going to implement. Is essentially it will be looking at your legislative laws, your regulatory laws, your contractual obligations, and your compliance obligations of what data you want to retain for how long you want to retain. Right? It is through this retention of that data that you will be able to investigate. Right? It's basically a science. It's not magic. So for me to investigate something, some things need to exist first, right? So let it be a cloud or a physical infrastructure. The first thing that you go to is your logging and monitoring activities. If you have configured those properly, if you're creating those evidences that will allow you to store that information for a certain period of time, and then later on, when you realize that there is an investigation that needs to be conducted for a particular incident that's happened, you're going to look into this information and try to identify what has happened previously. Now, this information can be stored on a hard disk drive or could be in a temporary storage on your hard disk drive, or could be uh, something that exists in your RAM, random access memory, and thus you will have to create policies and processes that will help you identify which information you want to gather, how long you want to gather and store it for, and how you're going to monitor those. Now, all of this sounds a little bit plausible in a in-house infrastructure or when you're looking at a physical infrastructure because you have access to that, you have control on that infrastructure, and you can uh, at any point in time get access to it and start your investigation. Things go a little bit haywire when you go into a cloud. Now, first and foremost, take a step back and talk about when do you feel that digital forensics would be required. Now, first and foremost is when you look at a security incident that has happened. The first thing that happens in a secure incident response plan is triaging. You want to triage that incident, you want to see whether that incident is true or false, and then you want to categorize it. You also want to investigate it to do a root cause analysis, right? The root cause analysis would try to identify who did what happened when, and what security control failed, any information that you seek from that analysis. Now, this is where the forensics come into the picture. So, you basically want to have digital forensics baked into your incident response plan. Now, how when an incident response plan exists, you're basically tying it up with a security operations center where you got a SOC and you've got a playbook where you have detailed and created steps of how to react to something that has happened. So, on a physical infrastructure, again, that can be well defined. You've got access, you've got everything in control, it's your own policies and procedures. Now, take that to a cloud, right? And this is where we start talking about what kind of deployment models are there and what kind of service models are there, because the roles and responsibilities of a cloud service provider or a cloud consumer or a cloud auditor would change based on what your uh, control matrix looks like, right? So if you look at the screen, this is the NIST definition of cloud computing, right? So what is NIST? NIST is the National Standards Institute of Standards and Technology, right? And this is one of the standardizing authority that has regulated and standardized computers technology over a period of time. And thus, when we go back into asking questions, why does a cloud function the way it is? Who decided or who standardized this? What is a private cloud? What is a public cloud? Who decided what it is? We come back to these organizations, right? So you have got the NIST, you got the IEEE, you got IETF, IANA, ICANN, and a few other organizations that work together in standardizing these technologies. And thus, when we go into questions about forensics, we again go back to these organizations to look at guidance, to look at standards, to look at best practices of how we want to conduct a forensic investigation. Now, I am aware that the participants are students, audience is students. So I'm going to keep it very baseline. I'm not going to go into too much of legalities and all of those things. But just as a overview, we know that there are four different deployment models of a cloud, right? So if I've got a private cloud, which is nothing but me having another data center of my own on which I have deployed a cloud, the responsibility matrix lies on me. So I've got access to it. I've got all the policies that I can create. I own that infrastructure. I can manage and maintain it. Thus, forensics is going to be a little bit more easier. The moment I go to a public cloud, now what is a public cloud? A public cloud is a data center that is hosted publicly by an organization where the world, whenever it wants, can connect through the internet and access whatever services they want to access. Now, what is the difference between a private cloud and a public cloud? The main difference from a forensic perspective we want to understand is the multi-tenancy part of it, right? Now, what is multi-tenancy? Multi-tenancy is sharing of resources with other users, bluntly put, right? So in a private cloud, if I own the data center and it is used solely for one single organization, right? The multi-tenancy is limited to the employees of that organization. But the moment you go to a public cloud, right? On the public cloud, the multi-tenancy is now exposed to the rest of the world. For example, if I'm using a virtual hard disk right now, the moment I release that virtual hard disk or the virtual space that I'm consuming, that space will be wiped clean by the cloud service provider and will be rented out to somebody else, right? And that somebody else could be anybody on the globe. Now, here, from a digital forensic perspective or from a digital security perspective, I would request the public cloud to ensure that when I'm releasing this kind of a hard disk, a virtual hard disk, it needs to be completely wiped of data remnants so that the new user would not be able to recover any data from it, which basically goes counterproductive to forensics because if that data no longer exists or if I'm no longer able to get access to that virtual hard drive, I'll basically not be able to investigate anything. Right, so it's a catch 22 situation where you have to balance what your regulatory and contractual obligations are towards data remnants, data storage, data security, and then you have to balance how much data you want uh, from a perspective of a forensic investigation. Right now, the the basic thing here is if I'm on a private cloud which is my own data center, or I'm on a public cloud, which is a global data center, the multi-tenancy is the main aspect that is of that differs. Now, what makes a cloud, right? And that is answered by the same standardizing authority, where if you've got an infrastructure which adheres to these five characteristics, it is a cloud. It can be described as a cloud model where it is available on demand, self service to the consumer. So the consumer can anytime connect to this cloud, consume the service whenever they want it to be. It is available through broad network access that allows you location independence and allows you uh, uh, consumption of the cloud through any model, including IoT and computers and everything else. You are accessing a resource pool of certain resources, which offers you rapid elasticity, scalability, and clustering, and all that comes into picture. And the most major aspect of a cloud is that it is offered to you as a measured service. So if you've got a physical data center that adheres to these five characteristics, it is still a cloud. Virtualization is a cloud enabler, but is not an essential characteristic. Virtualization allows us to refine the cloud for more resource optimization and cost optimization, but it is not an essential requirement for a cloud. Now, what happens on a cloud is that you're going to consume services like software as a service, platform as a service, and infrastructure as a service. So, from a digital forensic perspective, either my approach to a cloud digital forensics is from an administrative perspective, where I'm a cloud deployment architect, or from a consumer perspective, from a service perspective, when I'm consuming a particular service. Right? So, if I go on to, let's say, a public cloud like AWS and I'm consuming infrastructure as a service, the responsibility matrix, two approaches on how I want to look at digital forensics. Either from an administrative perspective, where I'm looking at governance, risk, and compliance of while deploying a cloud, or from a consumer's perspective, where I'm consuming a service, either software as a service, platform as a service, or infrastructure as a service. Right now, this is a document from Microsoft. This is how they see the responsibility from a on-premise data center that you own or you consider software as a service. platform as a service, or infrastructure as a service. So if you look, the blue, the light blue or the sky blue, whatever that color is the cloud service provider. Let's keep it generic. Let's not keep only Microsoft in mind. This is true for AWS, Google Cloud, Rackspace, any other cloud that you will come across, right? The dark blue is the customer, and the mix is the shared responsibility matrix. Now, this is from a functionality and a security perspective, both. Thus, when you start defining your security requirements, you're looking at who's responsible for which aspect of the cloud. Now, you'll see that information and data will always be the responsibility of the end user. Why? It is my data, I own it, and I don't want my cloud service provider or any other agency looking at my data, essentially for data privacy reasons, right? But the moment I talk about data in motion, where data is being transmitted, and I'm looking at network controls, you will see the difference coming in, where the responsibility matrix will change. And at this point in time, if let's say if I'm using platform as a service and I want to look at data in motion and data at rest is where data is stored on a particular hard drive and is static. Data in motion is when data is transmitted from one endpoint to another. Let's say you're visiting a website, and the website is responding back to you, sending data back to you. That is data in motion. So at that point in time, it is a in a platform as a service, it is a shared responsibility of how you're going to look at security. So the moment you have implemented security controls on these or on any of these mechanisms, this will determine how you're going to manage your uh, forensics requirements. Why? Because it is these security controls that are going to generate that data or that evidence that you can investigate to see if there was a problem that may have happened. And thus, if the entire responsibility is of the cloud service provider, then where does that leave you into forensic investigation? Because most likely the cloud service provider will not give you access to infrastructural data as far as a public cloud is concerned, right? So this is where your policies, your governance, your vendor relationship management, your contracts with the cloud service provider about what they're going to allow and all those things come into the picture. Look at this for an example. If I'm using an in-house security operations center on an on-prem infrastructure, on-premise, right? I can create an incident response plan, and I can uh, look at for a digital forensics where I can provide certain tools, certain procedures that will allow people to investigate and retrieve that data, right? Now, this is when I'm on premise and everything is in my hand. The moment I put it on a public cloud. So essentially, if I'm looking at incident management at this point in time, I can define those incidents. I can create SLAs, service level agreements for those incidents, and I can manage those incidents internally. Right? What are service level agreements? Uh, the service level agreements are the response time to a particular incident and the resolution time that you're going to take for that incident. Now, if you're on a public cloud, how are you going to manage those incidents, response times, and resolution times if you have a dependency on the cloud service provider? And this is where your responsibility matrix comes into the picture, where you're going to define that responsibility. And if something is the responsibility of the cloud service provider, you will have to create a contractual obligation that you get access to certain resources. Now, if I'm creating this kind of a governance framework, right? Saying this is what I want from a particular public cloud or from a particular service provider. Let it be a SaaS, PaaS, or IaaS model. How do I go with that? So again, here we are not left in the lurch, right? Normally, people think we'll need to negotiate a contract or we'll need to talk to an account manager and probably see what we can do. There are standards out there that will allow you to place this infrastructure in hand before. So you've got standards like ISO 27001, or for the cloud service provider, you've got ISO 27017 that instructs the cloud service provider on how cloud security should be handled, which includes cloud forensics as well, right? Now, apart from that, there is another organization called a Cloud Security Alliance that looks at cloud security and thus provides you with resources. So what they do is they provide a cloud control matrix, CCM, allows us to look at how we implement, how do we and how do we interact with the cloud service provider in talking about cloud security and cloud forensics, right? So this is a comprehensive uh, a tool given to architects that allow them to look at various governances, risks, compliances that they would face or they would need to adhere to, and then they need to implement these as security or as policies and procedures in their governance frameworks. And this is what you would negotiate with a cloud service provider. So, what kind of questions to ask a cloud service provider is where these things come into the picture, right? Going back, right? Now, this is how the security challenges are answered as far as a cloud service provider is concerned, right? Now, if I take you to the cloud control matrix, so this is the first thing. Now, this is a questionnaire that you need to ask the CSP and get answers to those. Based on those, it will basically be determined who's responsible for what, right? So, the first questions that you're going to ask, right, uh, are policies and procedures for security incident management, e-discovery and cloud forensics established, documented, approved, communicated, applied, evaluated, and maintained. It's not a yes or no answer. It's basically you want to look at how they maintain their own policies and procedures, and you're going to try to compare it with what your policies and procedures were. Take for an example, if I, as an organization, am migrating from on-premise data center and I'm migrating to a public cloud, right? Now, having an on-premise data center, assuming that I'm 27001 compliant and whatnot, I would already have a governance framework implemented in my organization. That includes incident management, incident resolution, uh, response times, SLAs, forensics, different tools that are available for those forensics, and so on and so forth. Now, if I migrate to a public cloud and the CISO at that point in time would then be engaged with the public cloud, trying to understand their policies and procedures to check if they can still adhere to the service level agreements and the policies or the governance framework described on an on premise data center, right? So, essentially, when you're looking at uh, forensic investigations, you're looking at a shared responsibility between yourself as a consumer and the cloud service provider, depending on the service model and the deployment models you're on. Now, let's look at a couple of examples. Software as a service. Where do we see this? As a baseline example, look at Gmail, right? Gmail, which is an email service that we all use. We all would have most likely have a Gmail address. Gmail is a software as a service. What does that mean? The software is deployed offsite on a public data center that is owned by Google. It is Google who's responsible for that application, the maintenance of the application, the security parameters of those applications, right? At no point in time are we under any control of what encryption mechanism we want to use to store our emails. We have no control about where they are located. And uh, we have no control on the application version. We have no control about retention of data. At this point in time, we're basically at the mercy of the service provider. But when I get into an agreement, let's say if I'm using G Suite, which is the enterprise level solution that Google provides, at that point in time, the contract changes a little bit and I get a certain level of clarity with a service level agreement of what kind of information will be made available to me in case of incidents. So I get an account manager. If let's say if one of my account gets hacked or if some of my data is impacted, what kind of information would be shared to me by the cloud service provider for forensic investigation, for providing information to regulatory authorities and everything else, right? Platform as a service is when you're renting what you can say, uh, a development platform, right? So let's say I go onto AWS Code Guru and I'm renting their platform and I'm developing an application there. So in platform as a service, you can see that some of these responsibilities are shared, some of these are clearly defined to the cloud service provider, some of these are dependent or completely reliant on the customer themselves. So here you're going to be engaged with the cloud service provider. You're going to discuss the strategies of how you're going to implement security and how you're going to implement forensics. Now, you do have a comprehensive matrix of how you want to handle these forensics mechanisms. For example, look at these security controls, right? So the CCM, as you would see here, is a cloud control matrix that looks at how you're going to manage security incidents, how you're going to look at e-discovery, and how you're going to look at cloud forensics from a shared responsibility perspective, and how you're going to uh, create your policies on based on that, right? So the first and foremost will always be establish documents, approve communication, apply, evaluate, and maintain policies and procedures for security incident management, which includes e-discovery of your data, includes claim forensics, and review and update the policies and procedures at least annually to ensure that they are in sync with what your organization requires. Now, it will also include testing and updating as necessary incident response plans at planned intervals or upon significant organizational or environmental changes for effectiveness. Now, in my personal experience, when I am managing a SOC, which is based on basically on where there is a hybrid infrastructure, where there is a partial physical infrastructure that is owned by the organization, and then it is connected to a public cloud like AWS or Microsoft, and you've got this hybrid infrastructure coming in. That is when these things get a little bit more complicated. You have the ease of use for your physical infrastructure in house that you're going to manage and maintain. However, you still have to create a vendor relationship management program with the cloud service provider where you're going to ask these questions. And now you're going to create an incident response plan that will help you look at both of these scenarios, right? So you can see the typical control, applicability, and ownership defined over here. At every point in time, it is maintained that SaaS, PaaS, or IaaS, software as a service, platform as a service, or infrastructure as a service, it is going to be a shared responsibility, right? You might need physical access to certain resources. You would require network level access, network level logs and monitoring. You would require compute, storage, application level access, data level access, and so on and so forth. But you may not be a part of the internal audits or the architecture team or the software development team because you're in a public cloud, right? So this is something that will give you guidance into how you want to develop your digital forensic strategies, right? Now, if you look at all the trainings that are out there, most of the trainings tell you how to do the forensic analysis. They will give you a tool, they will give you those steps, and they will help you analyze those things. The problem arises is whether you're allowed to utilize that tool from a legal perspective, and to what extent can you use that tool, right? And this is where again this control matrix comes into the picture. This is where you're going to establish with the cloud service provider what tool sets, what procedures you're going to utilize for incident investigations, for your forensic analysis. Now, it's not only about these controls, they'll also tell you about implementation of these, right? So, if you've looked at establishing, documenting, approving, communicating, and all that, so how do you do that? You have to have management approval for everything and anything that you do, right? Who's going to manage incidents? Who should incorporate clearly defined roles and responsibilities? If this is not enabled, if this is not done, even if you're equipped with the correct tools and the correct knowledge with for digital forensics, you would not be able to conduct those forensics in the first place. Now, looking at other aspects, now looking at auditing guidelines, right? Uh, let's say now that you have established something for forensic investigation, you've in the first aspect, you've looked at the cloud control matrix, you've determined that you have to establish, document, and you've got to create those governance, risk, and compliance mechanisms. You've looked at the implementation guidelines, what you need to implement for what aspect. Now, it's not just one question. If you scroll down, you will talk about management policy and procedures, the life cycle, incident response plans, how are you going to implement those, right? They should provide a roadmap for handling incidents involving the organization's cloud services and products and services upon those services that they rely upon. These plans should apply whether those dependencies are internal, such as IT operations, support, and legal, or external, which include suppliers, vendors, partners, customers, and other third parties, right? So all of these now that you have looked at these guidelines and you've implemented them, you need to audit them to ensure that they actually do work. They are working as planned. They are actually providing the services that they intended to do. And this is how you're going to audit whether your forensic mechanisms are working properly or not. And first and foremost, you might want to determine the applicability of it. So this is where you're scoping your digital forensics. You're allowing a contractual creation where you say that this is what we want to look for. These are the areas that we want to investigate, or we envision that our incident management may investigate upon. And thus, based on the governance frameworks and the implementations, these are how the policies and procedures are going to function for to allow me to investigate or do a digital forensics when I'm on a cloud, right? So this, in a nutshell, is how the industry is moving on towards enabling organizations to still be secure. And if there is a security incident, be able to investigate it even while being on a cloud, right? So, with that, I would like to conclude the topic. I'm open to questions. If there are any questions, please let me know.
Hi, Bipin. Thank you for that. We do have a couple of questions. I think the first question is how is cloud different from traditional data centers?
How is cloud different from a traditional data center? Okay, that's a good question. Uh, uh, I refer you back to the definition of a cloud, right? So, if I've got a traditional data center that can still adhere to these five characteristics, I can still classify it as a cloud model. The main classifier is the aspect that you're providing a measured service, right? So, for a consumer who's coming onto, let's say, AWS uh, and is using EC2, Elastic Cloud Compute, they won't be paying a bulk amount or they won't be paying ad hoc amounts upfront. They would only be paying for what they have consumed. That is what a measured service is, right? And if you adhere to these five characteristics, a traditional data center can also be classified as a cloud compute model.
Okay. The next question is, can you force public data stores to secure your data with fines?
Sorry, can you force public data stores
So,
to secure
if
your data with fines? Uh, if it is a public data, what kind of what kind of fines are you looking for? I mean, uh, I need
uh,
some more clarity on
I
that.
assume I assume the gist of this question or the tone of this question is, can you improve the amount of security cloud service providers provide you by forcing fines on them if they, I would say, uh, accidentally or due to improper methods have a data leak or data breach happen?
Well, there are laws in place like GDPR, but that they talk about personal identifiable information and private information. If data is already public and it is already in the public domain, uh, it cannot be secured, right? The only thing that you're looking for is integrity verification. So if somebody hacks into, let's say, your website, which is publicly available data, and is able to compromise that data and change it, then yes, if you can prove it is the fault of the service provider where they got hacked and your data got compromised, based on the contractual obligations, you can impose penalties on the cloud service provider.
Okay. So ultimately, it comes down, I would assume from your statement, it depends on your contract with the cloud service provider and what it states.
Contractual obligations and legal aspects as well. Yes.
Okay. So I think we are done with the questions,
Okay.
and I think you timed it perfectly because it's right on time. Your time slot.
There we are. We timed it perfectly, did we? That's great. That's great. Mm.
Okay. So
All right. Thanks, Aditya. Thanks,
thank you.
everyone,
Thank you
for
so
your
much,
time.
Bipin. Pleasure having you again. Have
It
a
was a pleasure
great
talking.
weekend. And please do attend the remaining 2 days and listen to the other speakers as well.
Oh, definitely. I've been here since morning. I've been listening to
Yes.
everyone. It's been quite enlightening.
Great. So thanks, Bipin. Have a good day. Have a great weekend.
Thanks, Aditya. You too. Take care.